The perfect excuse, a forced apology, and the one secret I had been holding, my only real weapon. They wanted me to bow my head. They wanted me to look sorry. But they forgot one crucial thing a cornered woman does not bow. She strikes. My husband pleaded with me. Please, it's her night. He had no idea that tonight was about to become mine. My name is Alara. I am 34 years old, and I work as a senior data analyst at Aperture Dynamics. I find comfort in numbers, in the clean, indisputable logic of a data set. I can make sense of chaos, find the pattern in the noise. My own life, however, was becoming a signal I could no longer read. It started on a Tuesday, one of those thick, wet evenings in Denver when the air feels like a heavy blanket you cannot throw off. The humidity had broken against the mountains and settled over the city, pressing in through the windows of our living room. I was trying to finish a projection model, my laptop balanced on my knees, the screen a stark blue light in the dimming room. The only sound was the click of my keys and the distant, unsatisfied rumble of thunder. I had been working for 10 hours straight. I just wanted to close the file, close my eyes, and make the headache behind my right temple disappear. Then Marcus came home. I heard his key in the lock, the familiar slide and click, but the energy that entered the room with him was wrong. It was too bright, too loud. Ilara still at it. I looked up. Marcus stood in the archway, his tie already loosened, his jacket slung over one arm. He was smiling, a wide, polished smile that sat on his face like a piece of expensive, ill-fitting furniture. It was the smile he used for clients he was trying to impress, not the one he used for me. In his hand, he held a small, cream-colored envelope. It was thick, rigid cardstock, shimmering with a faint gold leaf border. What's that?" I asked, my fingers still resting on the keyboard. "You will not believe this," he said, striding over. He did not kiss me. He just held out the invitation like a trophy. "She's finally done it. Sarah's getting married." The name hit the air and hung there, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Serafina. Of course. Serafina, his perfect ex. The woman whose ghost had haunted every room I shared with Marcus for the last 5 years. The woman I had been measured against in 1,000 silent ways and always found wanting. I did not take the card. I just stared at it. "I'm not going." The words were flat, final. There was no room for discussion. Marcus's smile faltered, just a fraction. "What, Alara? Do not be like that. It is an engagement party. We have to go. It is the polite thing to do." Polite to who? Marcus. To her. I finally looked up from the gilded edges and met his eyes. "I have no reason to celebrate her. You know what I think of her." "You know what she is." "What she is," he said, his voice taking on that patient, patronizing tone I hated, "is an old friend who is moving on with her life. An old friend, I might add, who is marrying Julian Croft. Do you have any idea who he is? The man is a major player. This is a big deal for her." "Good for her," I said, turning back to my screen. The numbers were swimming. "I'm busy that night. I'm busy every night until this project is done." The sigh was heavy, theatrical. He sat down on the ottoman opposite me, leaning in close, invading the small bubble of focus I had left. He dropped the invitation onto my laptop, blocking my view. "Alara, look at me. This is not just about being polite. There is another reason." A cold, familiar dread started to crawl up my spine. I closed the laptop, the invitation sliding into my lap. "What reason?" He ran a hand through his perfect hair. "It is about that incident at the Aperture holiday party last year." My breath caught. Incident. He called it. I called it the night I finally saw the truth. Well, Sarah feels that there is some lingering discomfort between you two. Marcus continued, picking his words with deliberate care. She told me she feels genuinely awful about how things were left, and she just wants to clear the air before she starts this new chapter. She feels uncomfortable around you. Uncomfortable. Serafina was uncomfortable. And I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. And he said, I told her you would be happy to clear the air. Happy to. I told her you would come to the party and just, apologize. Pull her aside. Say you are sorry for the misunderstanding. Wish her well. That is it. Just be the bigger person. Alara, it will take 5 minutes. I stared at him. The room, which had felt suffocatingly close, now felt vast and cold, as if he were speaking to me from a great distance. He was not just asking me to go to her party. He was demanding I go to her, in her moment of triumph, and apologize. Apologize, I repeated. It was not a question. It was a statement of disbelief. You want me to apologize to her? For God's sake, Alara, do not make this difficult. It was a misunderstanding. You were both stressed. It was not a misunderstanding. Marcus, I said, the memory of that night rising up, as sharp and painful as broken glass, the chill of the ballroom, the smell of pine and spilled champagne. I had been looking for Marcus, and I heard her voice, that smooth, melodic voice drifting from behind a tall, ridiculously festive poinsettia display. She was speaking to Mr. Harrison, my department head. She is a wonderful analyst, of course, Sarah was saying, her tone dripping with false concern. But she is just, well, she is a bit too emotional for the new platform projection. Don't you think she gets so attached, so unstable when the pressure is on? I am just not sure she has the resilience for a leadership role. She was actively sabotaging me, using her long-standing friendship with my boss to paint me as unstable, all while smiling in my face at the buffet table 30 minutes earlier. When I confronted her right then and there, her eyes had widened in perfect, practiced innocence. Alara, what are you talking about? I was just telling him how dedicated you are. I had looked to Marcus, standing right beside her, for support. He had just looked embarrassed. He had put his hand on my arm and said, Alara, you are making a scene. You clearly misheard her. Let's get some air. He had believed her. Or, worse, he had chosen to believe her because it was easier. Now, a year later, in my own living room, he was choosing her again. She lied about me, I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. She tried to cost me a promotion. She called me unstable to my boss, and you want me to apologize for it. Marcus threw his hands up in exasperation. That is in the past. It is ancient history. She is getting married to one of the most powerful investors in the state, and you are stuck on some petty office drama from a year ago. It does not matter who was right or wrong anymore. It matters to me. Well, it should not. He snapped. His patience was gone, the charming mask falling away to reveal the cold irritation beneath. This is important, Alara. This connection with Julian Croft. It is important for my career. It is important for us. All you have to do is put your pride aside for one evening and be the bigger person. Just be gracious. Why is that so hard for you? He stood up, looming over me. The smile was long gone. Just do this. For me. I looked at the man I had married, the man I had loved because I thought he was kind, because I thought he saw me, and in that moment, I realized he did not see me at all. He saw a problem to be managed, a difficult employee, a tool to get what he wanted. This was not an invitation. It was not a request. It was a command, wrapped in the language of a favor. He put his hand on my shoulder. The weight of it felt wrong. It was not the comforting touch of a husband. It was the heavy, possessive grip of someone asserting control. The heat from his palm seeped through my shirt, but I felt impossibly cold. The air in the room was so thick I could barely breathe. I looked down at the glittering invitation in my lap. Serafina, Julian, a new life. And I, Ilara, was the toll booth they had to pass through, and my husband was the one demanding I collect the fee from myself. Fine, I said. The word tasted like ash. For you, sleep was impossible. I lay in the dark, the digital clock on the nightstand glowing 2:17 a.m. in blood-red numerals. Beside me, Marcus breathed deeply, peacefully. The sound of his contentment was an insult. My yes had cost him nothing and bought him everything. It had cost me, I was not yet sure what the final tally would be, but the down payment was this hollow, vibrating anger that left no room for rest. My mind kept replaying his words, but beneath them, I heard the echo of a decade's worth of comparisons. Serafina. Sarah. The woman who was not just an ex-girlfriend, but a benchmark. Marcus never said, "You should be more like Sarah." He was too subtle for that. Instead, he would praise her in the abstract, leaving me to draw the inevitable, painful conclusions. Sarah is just so sophisticated, he would say after we ran into her at some alumni event. Sophisticated, a word that meant she wore silk blouses instead of my comfortable knits, that she drank dry martinis instead of my Merlot, that she never, ever raised her voice. She is incredibly ambitious, you know, he would remark, scanning a business journal where her name was mentioned in passing. Ambitious. When Sarah did it, it was admirable, a sign of her drive. When I pushed for a new project or worked late, I was stressed or overdoing it. And his favorite, she just knows how to handle things. This was the blade he twisted most often. It meant Sarah glided through conflict, diffusing it with a cool, detached smile, while I felt things. I showed them. I was emotional. That word, it was the heart of the incident. I closed my eyes, and I was back at the holiday party, the scent of pine and cinnamon thick in the air. I had been so proud that night. I was on the verge of landing the lead on the new platform projection, a project that would mean a massive promotion. I was looking for Marcus to share the good buzz I'd been hearing from my director. I found Serafina first. She was in a small alcove by the bar, shimmering in a silver dress, holding court with Mr. Harrison and two of the VPs. I smiled, walking up, but stopped just out of sight, blocked by a large, fake, snow-covered fir tree. "Oh, Ilara," Sarah was saying. Her voice was like honey, laced with just a touch of pity. She is a brilliant analyst, truly, but she is just, well, she is too emotional for a project of this magnitude. Harrison frowned. Emotional. She seems dedicated. That is just it, Sarah said, leaning in, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur I had to strain to hear. She gets so invested, so attached to her data, that she cannot see the bigger picture, and the pressure. Frankly, she becomes unstable. We saw it in the third quarter push. I am just not sure she has the resilience for a leadership role. It would be a disservice to her, really, to set her up to fail. A disservice. Unstable. The words were clinical, cold, and utterly devastating. She was poisoning the well, painting my passion as hysteria. I stepped out from behind the tree. Unstable. Sarah. Her face, for one beautiful fleeting second, was a mask of pure shock, but she recovered in an instant. Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her chest in a flawless pantomime of hurt innocence. Ilara, oh my goodness, you completely misunderstood. I was just telling Mr. Harrison how incredibly dedicated you are. You called me unstable, I said, my voice shaking. I could feel the blood draining from my face. You said I could not handle the pressure. Ilara, I would never, she breathed. I looked past her, searching for my husband. Marcus had just walked up. He had seen the last 10 seconds, seen my face, seen Sarah's performance. Marcus, I said, desperation in my voice. Tell her what she just did. Marcus looked from me to Sarah, and then to Mr. Harrison, who was watching us with extreme discomfort. I saw the calculation in my husband's eyes. I saw him weigh the options, my messy public truth versus her smooth, convenient lie. He did not hesitate. Ilara, you are overreacting, he said, his voice low and tight. He grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging in. You clearly misheard her. Apologize to Sarah. You are making a scene. What? I could not believe it. She is lying. Marcus, you are embarrassing me, he hissed. Right now. Stop it. I looked at his face, flushed with anger and shame. But the shame was not for what Sarah had done. It was for me. I was his mess, his emotional, unstable wife, proving Sarah's point for all to see. That betrayal, that single moment, cut deeper than Sarah's ambition ever could. She was just a snake. I knew what she was. But Marcus, he was my husband. He was supposed to be my anchor, my defender. Instead, he had handed me an anvil and told me to apologize for drowning. I got the project, but only after 6 weeks of fighting for it, of proving my stability over and over. Marcus and I never really talked about it. He called it that awful night and said we should move on. I had tried, but it was a wound that had not healed. It had just scarred over, tight and ugly. Now, lying in the dark, I understood. He had never believed me. He did not just want peace. He needed it, even if it was a false peace built on my humiliation. He needed to believe Sarah was good and sophisticated and that I was the problem, because the alternative was too much to confront. The alternative meant his perfect ex was a manipulator and he had been a fool, or worse, a coward. A sudden, restless energy filled me. I could not lie there a second longer. I slipped out of bed, the floorboards cool under my feet. The house was silent. I walked past my office and into his. His closet door was ajar. On the top shelf, behind a row of winter sweaters, was a worn, brown shoebox. I had seen it before, but never thought to look inside. I was not a snooper. I was the one who believed in trust, in privacy. I was, as Sarah would say, unstable. I pulled it down. It was not full of old shoes. It was full of her. Dozens of photographs. Marcus and Sarah at a black-tie charity dinner, his arm around her waist, her head tilted back in a laugh. Marcus and Sarah on a sailboat, both tan and windswept, looking like a magazine ad. Marcus and Sarah at Christmas in his parents' old house, her wearing one of his sweaters, holding a mug. In every single one, they looked happy. They looked powerful. A matched set, a unit. He was looking at her in some of them with a raw, undisguised admiration that made my stomach clench. I put the photos back, one by one. The cold feeling of dread I'd had earlier was crystallizing into something new. Suspicion. A hard, analytical suspicion. Why now? Why did he care so much about clearing the air for a woman he supposedly had not been with for half a decade? Why was this apology so critical to his career? He said it was about her new fiancé, Julian Croft, a big investor. But investors do not typically hinge deals on whether their new fiancé gets an apology from an ex's wife over office gossip. It made no sense. The data points did not align. My eyes swept his desk. It was a controlled mess of industry reports, old memos, and junk mail. He hated when I organized it. I know where everything is, he'd insist. But something was out of place. Tucked under a stack of old, curling financial statements was a single sheet of paper. It was face down. It was whiter than the rest, the edges sharp and new. It had been printed recently, and hidden. My hand moved on its own. I slid the paper out. I turned it over. It was an email, not a long one. The formatting was stark. From Julian Croft to Marcus Thorne's subject. Regarding our terms. My heart stopped. I scanned the first few lines. It was not a social email. It was not a congratulatory note. It was cold, direct, and transactional. It was about a new joint venture, capital, and timelines. And then I saw my own name. I slid the email back under the stack of financial statements, positioning it exactly as I had found it. My hand was not shaking. The shock had bypassed my emotions and gone straight to my nerves, leaving them humming like a high-voltage wire, but my fingers were steady. The part of me that analyzes, that finds patterns and discrepancies, had taken control. The wife, the one who was supposed to feel betrayed or hurt, was locked in a soundproof room, told to be quiet. I had a data problem, and I was going to solve it. I walked back to the bedroom. I did not sleep. I lay perfectly still, my eyes open in the dark, my mind processing the new variables, terms, joint venture, my name. I waited for the alarm. The next day, the performance began. Marcus, having secured my compliance through force, now moved to the second phase bribery. He was attempting to make me feel good about my own execution. He came home at 5:30, an hour earlier than usual. The first sign. The second was the bouquet in his hand. White lilies. I hated lilies. They were funereal, their scent thick and cloying. He knew I preferred freesias, but lilies were what Serafina always had in her apartment. They were, in his mind, sophisticated. For you, he said, deploying that dazzling, high-wattage smile. I know I was intense the other night. I just hate it when we are not on the same page. Alara, I want us to be good. I took the flowers, the stems cold and wet. Thank you, Marcus. They are beautiful. My voice was a perfect facsimile of mild gratitude. I put them in a vase, the sickly sweet smell already filling the kitchen, a phantom of Sarah's presence in my home. And, he announced, rolling up his sleeves, I am making my carbonara. You just sit down. Relax. You have been working so hard. He bustled around the kitchen, a whirlwind of manufactured charm. He grated parmesan. He chopped parsley. He hummed along to some indie band he thought sounded ambitious. It was a nauseating spectacle. Every gesture was a lie, a down payment on my silence. I sat at the kitchen island, my laptop open, pretending to check emails. I was, in fact, cataloging his behavior. The overly attentive questions, the way his eyes kept checking mine for approval, the forced, casual laughter. He was an amateur actor in a poorly written play. While the pasta water was coming to a boil, his back to me, I initiated my own script. This man Sarah is marrying, I said, my voice carefully neutral, as if the thought had just occurred to me. Julian Croft, you said he was a big player. Marcus turned around, leaning against the counter. He looked relieved, as if I had finally opened the door he had been waiting by. A big player, Alara. The guy is a rocket. He runs a private equity fund, Croft Capital. Unbelievable reputation. He finds these obscure tech startups, sinks in 8 figures, and 6 months later they are household names. He does not just follow the market, he makes it. He is exactly the kind of person I need to be connecting with. He was speaking too quickly. The words were too practiced. So that is what this is really about, I said, looking up from my screen. It is not about Sarah's feelings. It is not about clearing the air. It is about you wanting to network with him. He let out a sharp, theatrical laugh. Guilty, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Is that so terrible, Alara? A man like Julian Croft? A good relationship there could change everything for my career. For us. There it was. Us. The word he used as a shield. That is why this apology thing is so important. He went on, walking over to me. He gently closed my laptop, a gesture that was meant to be caring but felt like censorship. Think about it. Sarah is going to be his wife. She is going to be in his ear every single day. I cannot have him thinking my wife is holding some petty, ancient grudge against her. It looks unprofessional. It makes me look like I cannot even manage my own house. It was the perfect explanation. It was logical, ambitious, and just selfish enough to be completely believable. It painted him as a flawed but driven husband, and me as the slightly difficult, overly emotional partner. It was also, from beginning to end, a polished, rehearsed, and absolute lie. I knew this because I had seen the email regarding our terms. This was not about Marcus hopping to make a connection. This was not about a future good relationship. A deal was already in motion. Terms had been discussed. My apology was not an appetizer. It was a contractual obligation. He had practiced this. I could see him, sitting in his office, or maybe in his car in the garage, running these lines, anticipating my objections, preparing his counters. The sheer, cold calculation of it, the time he had spent crafting a plausible lie to feed his own wife, made me feel colder than the initial betrayal. He was watching my face, waiting for me to buy his story. So I did. I let out a long, slow breath, a perfect imitation of weary acceptance. Okay, I said, rubbing my temples. Okay, Marcus, I get it. It is business. You should have just said that from the beginning. You did not need to dress it up as being about Sarah's feelings. The relief that flooded his face was instantaneous and profound. It was like a taut wire had been cut. Exactly, he said, pulling me up from the stool and into a hug. It is just business. Thank you, Alara. Thank you. You will not regret this. This is going to be huge for us. I stood rigid in his embrace. He was warm, and he smelled like garlic and the expensive cologne I had bought him for his last birthday. But the hug was ice. It was the sterile, triumphant embrace of a salesman who had just closed a difficult account. I was the account. I will do it for you, Marcus, I whispered against his chest. He pulled back, beaming. That is my girl. Now, let's eat. This pasta is perfect. That night, I waited until 2 a.m. I waited until his breathing was deep and rhythmic, the deep sleep of a man whose problems have been solved. I slipped out of bed and went not to his office, but to mine. I powered up my work terminal, not the family laptop. I connected to my secure VPN, routing my signal through a server in Estonia. I opened a browser I never used for personal business, one I reserved for deep data analysis. I started to dig. Julian Croft, Croft Capital. Marcus was right about one thing. The man was a star. Articles in Forbes, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, quotes about market disruption, photos of him on panels, at charity galas, always in a perfectly tailored suit, always with the same charming, predatory smile. He was a wunderkind, a financial visionary. He was also perfectly, terrifyingly clean. I am an analyst. I know that no data set is perfect. Everyone has anomalies. A bad investment, a public complaint, a messy lawsuit, even a poorly tagged photo from a college party. Julian Croft had nothing. His digital footprint began exactly 5 years ago, as if he had been born, fully formed, with a 7-figure portfolio. This was not a clean record. This was a scrubbed one. Someone had meticulously and expensively erased his past. A man with nothing to hide does not work this hard to hide it. I spent 3 hours tunneling through corporate registries, looking for shell companies linked to Croft Capital. I searched legal databases in states he had supposedly worked in. Nothing. He was a digital fortress, sealed tight. At 4:30 a.m., I heard the floorboards in the hallway creak. I minimized my secure browser, pulling up the aperture projection model I was supposed to be working on. The door to my office opened. Marcus stood there, a shadow in the dim light. Alara, what are you doing? It is the middle of the night. Work, I said, my voice rough with fake sleepiness. I hit a snag in the regression analysis. Could not sleep. Figured I would fix it. He lingered. I could feel his suspicion. Okay, he said slowly. Well, try to get some sleep. The party is tomorrow night. I will. In a bit. He nodded, turned, and went to the bathroom. I heard the toilet flush. Then I heard his footsteps, not going back to our bedroom, but to his office, just down the hall. I heard the soft thrum of his desktop computer waking from sleep mode. I heard the rapid, quiet click, click, click of his mouse. He was there for less than a minute. Then, the computer chimed as it shut down. His footsteps retreated to our bedroom. I waited. I counted to 500. I walked to his office. I turned on his computer. I opened his web browser. The history was empty. The cache was clear. The cookies were deleted. The night I found the email, I had checked. His history had been normal sports scores, news sites, a search for best bourbon under $50. Now, it was sterile. He had woken up, seen me working, and panicked. He had scrambled to his own computer in the dead of night to erase his tracks, to delete whatever searches he had made about Julian, about Sarah, about the deal. I stood in the darkness of his office, the white, empty search bar of his browser glowing in the quiet. The last trace of doubt evaporated. My suspicion was no longer a feeling. It was a certainty. It was an irrefutable conclusion, backed by evidence. My husband was not just a liar, he was a desperate one, and he was sloppy. I did not need to find the proof anymore. I just needed to wait. He would bring it all to me. The day of the party. The air in the house was thin and sharp, like a shard of glass. Every sound was magnified: the scrape of a fork on a plate, the click of Marcus's watch as he fastened it. He was vibrating with a nervous, brittle energy, a stark contrast to his manufactured charm from the days before. He had been checking his phone all morning, his brow furrowed, his replies to me monosyllabic. At 3:15 in the afternoon, he came into the living room, nodding his tie, a tie I had never seen before, silk and a deep, aggressive blue. "Ilara," he said, not meeting my eyes. He was already in performance mode. "Damn it, I am so sorry. A client just called, a total emergency. A pipeline burst on one of his properties." A pipeline, a brilliant, unverifiable, urgent-sounding lie. "I have to run downtown. I have to meet him. I should be back by 5, maybe 5:30. Just start getting ready without me. I will meet you here, and we will go together." "Which client?" I asked. My voice was milk smooth. "Just a curious wife." His eyes flashed, a brief spark of anger. He hated being questioned. It threatened the integrity of his script. "You do not know him." "It is a new account. Look, I have to go." He kissed the air near my cheek. "Do not be late getting ready." "Okay, tonight is important." "I know," I said. "For us." He smiled, satisfied. "That is my girl." The front door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid home. I counted to 60, just to be sure. Then I stood. The clock on the mantel read 3:17. He said 5:30. I had, conservatively, 2 hours. I walked down the hall to his office. My footsteps were silent on the runner. I did not feel panic, or rage, or even sadness. I felt a profound, chilling clarity, the same focus I get just before I execute a query on a terabyte of raw data. I was here to find the variable that explained the anomaly. I sat in his chair. It was still warm. He had been in here just before he left, planning, rehearsing. I checked the desk first. The stack of old financial statements. I ran my hand under the pile. Gone. The printed email, the one with the subject line "regarding our terms," was gone. Of course it was. He was panicked. He had seen me in my office late at night. He had scrubbed his browser. He would scrub his desk, too. He thought he was being thorough. But Marcus is not a detail man. He is a salesman. He sells the big picture, He forgets the fine print. I turned on his computer. The desktop wallpaper was a photo of us, hiking near Aspen. We looked happy. The irony was acidic. I did not bother with his browser. I knew it would be a blank, white, innocent screen. Instead, my eyes went to the icon in the top left corner, the one he never ever thought about. The recycle bin. I double-clicked. A window popped open. My heart did not speed up. It just began to beat with a different rhythm, a slow, heavy thud, thud, thud that I felt in my hands and at the base of my throat. The bin was not empty. It was full of digital refuse. Old budget spreadsheets, JPEGs of logos, drafts of memos, and, time-stamped from that morning at 8:30 a.m., 3 deleted email files. He had not just deleted them from his inbox. He had shift-deleted them, thinking that was enough. He was a fool. I selected the 3 files. I right-clicked. I hit restore. I heard the faint whir of the hard drive as the files were pulled back from the digital ether, slotting themselves back into his email client's deleted items folder. I opened his email. I clicked the folder. And there they were. The first was the one I had seen RE regarding our terms. But it was not just the single page. It was a chain. A long chain between Marcus Thorne and Julian Croft. My eyes flew across the text, the analyst in me taking over, parsing, connecting, building the model. It was exactly what I suspected, but worse. A new joint venture, a consulting firm Marcus would run. Julian was providing the capital. 7 figures. And Marcus. What was Marcus, who had no capital and a mid-level job, bringing to the table? I found the clause. In exchange for which, Thorne will provide exclusive access to the Aperture Dynamics Q4 projection data, as well as analytics from the beta platform. I stopped breathing. The Q4 projection. The beta platform. That was my project. The project I was currently leading. The project I had fought for. The project Serafina had called me unstable for. He was not just starting a new business. He was planning to steal proprietary, confidential, career-ending data from my company. He was offering my work, my reputation, my entire professional life, as his buy-in. This was not ambition. This was a felony. I felt a wave of dizziness, and I gripped the edge of the desk. Focus. Ilara. Read the rest. I clicked on the second email. The subject line was RE Aperture Vector. This one was not between Marcus and Julian. It was between Marcus and Serafina. My hand was shaking now. I could not stop it. This was not a love letter. It was not a wistful exchange between old flames. It was worse. It was a negotiation. Sarah's email. From 5 days ago, Marcus. Julian is getting cold feet. He thinks you're too small time, and he's worried about the liability from your end. He doesn't like the risk. Marcus's reply, sent just minutes later. Frantic, desperate Sarah. Please, you promised. This is our one shot. You know I can deliver the data. Tell him I'm reliable. Tell him I'm solid. Sarah's response, from 3 days ago, was the one that made me physically recoil from the screen. He doesn't think you're reliable. He thinks you're messy. He knows about your wife. He heard about that scene she made at the holiday party, the one you told me about. He had used my humiliation as an anecdote. Julian doesn't believe you can handle something this sensitive. Sarah's email continued. He thinks you can't even control your own wife. He needs to see you're in charge of your own house, that you can handle liabilities. Liabilities. That was me. I was the liability. I had one email left, the final one. Final prep. It was from Serafina to Marcus, sent 2 days ago. The morning after he had pinned me with his hand and extracted my promise. My eyes found the paragraph. The words seemed to blur and then snap into horrifying, sharp focus. Julian needs to see that you can control everything, including her. He wants a demonstration. Make her apologize, and the agreement will be signed on the night of the engagement. He wants to see it. Marcus. He wants to see her be submissive. It's the final test. Get it done. I read the words again and again. He wants to see her be submissive. Get it done. I leaned back in his leather chair. The silence in the house was absolute. The ringing in my ears was deafening. It all slotted into place. The data points formed a perfect, horrifying picture. I was not just being betrayed. I was being trafficked. My public apology was not a social nicety. It was not clearing the air. It was not even, as I had suspected, a prerequisite for a negotiation. It was the final closing condition of a fraudulent business deal. My humiliation was the ink that would sign the contract. My submission, performed live in front of Julian Croft, was the collateral. Marcus was not just a liar and a thief. He was my pimp. And Serafina, his perfect, ambitious, sophisticated ex, was the broker. She was not just settling an old score by making me bow. She was solidifying her power, proving to her new fiancé that she could deliver her ex-boyfriend, who in turn could deliver his own wife. I looked at the clock on the screen. 4:37 p.m. I had been in his office for an hour and 20 minutes. I had everything I needed. I did not cry. Tears are a chemical reaction to pain or loss, and what I felt was neither. The shock had passed through me like a flash fire, burning away all the soft, useless emotions, the hurt, the confusion, the lingering hope. What was left was not an emotional void. It was a structure. It was a cold, perfect, crystalline clarity. I was no longer a wife. I was an analyst with a problem set, and I had just found the key variable. My hands, which had been shaking, were now perfectly still. I did not waste time rereading the words. They were seared into my memory. He wants to see her be submissive. Get it done. My first move was not one of rage, but of data preservation. I reached into Marcus's desk drawer, fumbling past loose paper clips and dead pens until my fingers closed on what I knew was a small, black, 16-gigabyte flash drive. He used it for client presentations. I slotted it into the USB port of his computer tower. The machine chimed softly, acknowledging the drive. I did not just copy the 3 email chains. I went to his main inbox, his sent folder, and his drafts. I selected everything from the last 6 months. I dragged the entire digital record of his betrayal into a single, compressed file. I added the audio file I had found buried in his downloads folder, a recording of a call he'd had with Julian, full of obsequious laughter and promises about the Q4 data. I password protected the zip file. The password I chose was Aperture Platform Lead 19, the title of the promotion he had tried to help Sarah deny me. I ejected the drive and slid the small piece of plastic into the watch pocket of my jeans. It was a tiny, dense weight against my hip. Then, I covered my tracks. I returned to his deleted items folder, selected the 3 restored emails, and held down the Shift key as I pressed Delete. I bypassed the recycle bin entirely. I went to the recycle bin anyway, just to be sure, and emptied the other trash he had left behind. I opened his browser, cleared the cache, the cookies, and the history one more time for good measure. I shut down the computer. I took a microfiber cloth from his drawer and wiped down the desk, the mouse, and the power button. I left the room exactly as I had found it. I had time. He was not due back for at least 45 minutes. I went back to my own office, to my secure terminal. I was not done. I had the what. I had the how. I still needed the final piece of the why. Julian Croft. Marcus was a pawn. Serafina was a greedy, ambitious knight, moving him around the board. But Julian was the king, and his digital fortress was too clean. The man who had been mysteriously dismissed from a lawsuit. I dove back into the archival databases, but I was not looking for Julian Croft. I was looking for the name of the lawsuit's plaintiff, the name of the collapsed fund. I cross-referenced the names of the other partners mentioned in that 4-paragraph article. It took me 25 minutes, tunneling through obscure, non-indexed regional business journals from the East Coast, and then I found it, not in the Wall Street Journal, in the digital archives of the Hartford Courant. The lawsuit 5 years ago had not just been dismissed. The lead plaintiff, a retired union carpenter who had lost his entire pension, had dropped the suit 2 days after his son was arrested on a suddenly unearthed 10-year-old drug trafficking charge. The charges against the son were, in turn, dropped 1 week after the lawsuit against Julian's fund was withdrawn. It was not a settlement. It was blackmail. So, Julian was not just a fraud. He was a predator. I finally understood the full, ugly topology of the deal. Julian was not just using Marcus to steal my data to make himself look like a genius. He was likely using Marcus as a cutout, a disposable tool. If the data theft from Aperture Dynamics ever came to light, Marcus would be the one holding the bag. Julian's name would be on nothing. Serafina, in her blind ambition to secure her wealthy husband, was feeding her ex-boyfriend to a shark, and Marcus, in his own blind, pathetic ambition to finally be Serafina's equal, was willing to feed his own wife to her. A brief, academic thought surfaced. I could stop this. I could warn Marcus. I could show him the article about Julian, explain that he was being set up as the fall guy. I could save him from professional ruin, maybe even prison. The thought vanished. Save him. The man who had written me off as a liability. The man who was going to watch me be submissive as the price of admission. No, I would not save him. I would not warn him. I was going to the party. I shut down my terminal. I walked into the kitchen and scribbled a note on a pad by the phone. Marcus, went out to find a dress for tonight. This party is important. I want to look right. See you there. E. I would not give him the chance to see me before we arrived. I would not give him the chance to approve or disapprove, or to tell me I looked nice. I did not go to my closet. I went to my car. I drove to the most expensive boutique in Cherry Creek North, the one I had only ever looked at from the sidewalk, the one where I knew Serafina bought her clothes. I walked past the racks of shimmering, sequined gowns and cocktail dresses. I was not looking for a revenge dress. A red dress is a scream. It is a desperate plea to be seen. It is, in its own way, emotional. I was looking for armor. I found it in the evening wear section. It was not red, or black, or silver. It was a heavy, liquid silk, the color of a perfect, flawless emerald, the color of cold, hard money, the color of poison. It had long sleeves, a high, severe neckline, and a back that was cut almost to the waist. It was not overtly sexy. It was not sad. It was just expensive. It was a statement of power, not of availability. It was the kind of dress Serafina would covet, and the one she would never, in a million years, expect me to have the audacity to wear. I bought it. I did not look at the price tag. I also bought the shoes, thin-strapped, 3-inch heels that were elegant and painful. The pain would keep me focused. I did not go home. I went to a salon 2 blocks away and had my hair washed and blown out, not in soft, forgiving waves, but in a severe, sleek sheet that fell down my back. I did my makeup in the rearview mirror of my car, a neutral, sculpted face, a waterproof mascara, and a lip color that was just a shade darker than my natural lips. I drove to the hotel where the party was being held. I changed in the marble and mahogany ladies' lounge on the mezzanine level. I slipped the cold silk over my head. It settled onto my skin, heavy and smooth. I fastened the diamond studs Marcus had given me for our 3rd anniversary. I stood in front of the full-length mirror. The woman who looked back at me was not Alara Thorne, the unstable analyst. She was not the wife who had to be managed. She was a stranger. She looked calm. She looked finished. I met my own gaze in the glass. The warmth was gone. The hurt was gone. The pleading, the desire to be understood, the need to be believed, it was all gone. My eyes were not full of fire. They were empty of it. They were the eyes of someone who has read the final line of data and has reached an irrefutable conclusion. The plan was set. They wanted a performance. They wanted to see me be submissive. They wanted me to apologize. I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would play the part of the repentant wife so perfectly. It would bring down the house. I would not scream. I would not cry. I would not cause a scene. I would just smile, and I would let them destroy themselves. I did not go home to get ready. I did not want to see Marcus. I did not want to give him the chance to comment on my appearance, to calibrate his performance against my own. I went to the ladies' lounge on the mezzanine floor of a hotel 2 blocks from Julian's estate, a silent, cavernous room of dark wood and marble. I changed there. When I met Marcus at the valet stand at exactly 7:30, his reaction was worth the price of the dress. His eyes widened, his mouth parting slightly. He drank me in. The emerald silk, the severe hair, the makeup that was not a mask but a sharpening. Ilara, he breathed. He took my hand, his own slightly clammy. Wow, you look absolutely incredible. See, I told you. This is a good night, a new start. He thought the dress was for him. He thought this was me, making an effort, signaling my surrender, my willingness to play the part of the impressive, sophisticated wife. He thought my armor was a costume. He was relieved. He led me toward the massive, carved front doors, and I could feel the nervous tension thrumming through his hand. He was a man walking into the most important interview of his life. Julian Croft's home was not a house. It was a monument to hostile architecture, a fortress of glass, steel, and pale limestone cantilevered over the hills of Cherry Creek. It did not have a view of the city. It presided over it. Valets in crisp black uniforms ran in silent, frantic circles, managing the influx of high-end electric vehicles and German sedans. The moment we stepped inside, the atmosphere changed. It was not just the 10-degree drop in temperature from the air conditioning. It was the air itself. It was thick, heavy, and pressurized, as if the room had been vacuum sealed. It was cloying with the mingled scents of hundreds of different, warring perfumes, all of them expensive, all of them screaming for attention. The only other smell was the faint, sterile scent of lilies. Thousands of them, their white, funereal heads drooping from massive silver vases. The party was not a celebration. It was a convergence of power. The room was packed, a sea of bespoke suits, surgical enhancements, and glittering, joyless diamonds. The sound was a low, steady roar, not of laughter, but of networking. The distinct cadence of men making deals and women assessing rivals. Every smile was a calculation. Every handshake was a contract. A wall of glass, 30 feet high, showed the lights of Denver spread out below us like a tray of spilled jewels. Waiters, looking as severe as surgeons, navigated the crush, their silver trays offering champagne and tiny, precarious towers of food. I saw a state senator I recognized. I saw the CEO of a rival data firm. I saw Mr. Harrison, my own boss, holding a glass of scotch and laughing too hard at something a man with a face like a dried apple was saying. This was the world Serafina and Marcus had been so desperate to join, and I knew, as I stood there in my emerald dress, that the entire glittering structure was rotten to the core. The money that paid for this glass box was built on fraud. The careers of the people laughing in this room were built on back-channel deals and quiet betrayals. It was a beautiful, polished, magnificent lie. Marcus was practically vibrating beside me. He was not looking at the view. He was not greeting colleagues. He was scanning the crowd, his eyes darting, his grip on my hand tightening until my bones ached. There, he breathed, almost a sound of pain. There they are. I followed his gaze. They were in the center of the room, by a fireplace that was all black marble and blue flame. They were not in the crowd. They were the crowd. A circle of people orbited them, angling for a word, a glance. Serafina was a vision in white. Of course she was. The dress was simple, long, and devastatingly expensive. A column of white crepe that made her look like a Greek statue. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek, intricate knot. She was radiant, her head tilted back, laughing at something the man beside her had said. She was the sun, and everyone else was just useless, light-drinking space. And Julian Croft. He was exactly as his photos had promised, dashing, charismatic. He wore a dark blue suit that was clearly custom-made. No tie. The top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. He had a strong jaw, a disarming smile, and the most alert, dangerous eyes I had ever seen. He was touching people, a hand on an arm, a light grasp on a shoulder. He was drawing them in, making them feel chosen. But as I watched him, his smile never once touched his eyes. He was a predator, perfectly disguised as a host. Marcus took a step, pulling me with him. "Okay," he said. His voice was a low, tight hiss, for my ears only. "This is it. This is the moment." He tugged my hand hard, forcing me to walk faster. "Elara, just be nice, please. Just be gracious, like we talked about. Do not make this weird. Just be nice." Be nice. The code word for be submissive. The password for his 7-figure deal. We were 10 feet away when Serafina saw us. I watched her face. It was a masterclass. For a single, imperceptible fraction of a second, her eyes flickered over me. It was not a greeting. It was an assessment. She scanned me, from my sleek hair to the emerald dress to the look on my face. It was the cold, analytical scan of arrival. Then, the mask snapped on. The brilliant, benevolent smile of the hostess. The queen. She detached herself from Julian's side and glided toward us, her arms opening slightly. Julian watched her go, and then his eyes found me. He did not smile. He just watched, his gaze cool and appraising. He was waiting for the performance. "Marcus," Sarah trilled. She kissed the air by his cheek. And then she turned to me. She took both of my hands in hers. Her skin was cool. Her smile was a perfect, dazzling, pitying thing. "Elara," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending, syrupy warmth. "I am so glad you came." The implication hung in the air between us, as thick as the perfume. "I'm so glad you, the unstable, emotional wreck, managed to pull yourself together. I'm so glad you knew your place and showed up." It was a declaration of total victory. I could feel Marcus beside me, practically holding his breath. He was a coiled spring of pure, desperate need. I looked into Serafina's triumphant eyes. I did not pull my hands away. I did not stiffen. I did not offer a cold, polite nod. I did exactly what she, and Marcus, and the man watching us from across the room, wanted me to do. I smiled. It was a small, gentle smile, a smile of concession, a smile of regret. I let my shoulders drop just a fraction, a perfect portrayal of someone who has come to terms with their own defeat. "Sarah," I said. My voice was soft, almost shy. "Thank you for inviting us. You look absolutely stunning. The dress is perfect." I let go of her hands and turned that same mild gaze on Julian, who had moved to stand just behind her. "And you must be Julian," I said, inclining my head. "It's wonderful to finally meet you." I glanced around the magnificent, cold room. "Your home is breathtaking. Julian is a very lucky man." The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. It was like a high-pitched sound had suddenly stopped. Serafina's triumphant smile became one of genuine, surprised pleasure. She had been braced for tension, for a sarcastic word, for the difficult Elara. She was not prepared for this easy, total capitulation. She positively glowed. "Elara, that is so sweet of you," she said, and she actually patted my arm. "Good girl." Beside me, I felt Marcus's entire body go slack. He let out a breath that was almost a gasp. The tension drained out of him. his shoulders slumping in profound, total relief. He slid his arm around my waist, pulling me tight against his side in a gesture of proud ownership. "She is amazing, is not she?" he said to Sarah, beaming. He kissed my temple, a public mark of his control. They both looked at me, Sarah and Marcus, partners in my submission. They were victorious. They were relieved. They thought the final obstacle had been cleared. They thought the liability had been handled. I kept the gentle, pliant smile on my face. I looked at my husband, and at the woman who was selling him out, and at the man who was going to destroy them both. They thought they had won. They had no idea that I had just armed the bomb. For the next hour, I was the perfect wife. I let Marcus keep his arm possessively around my waist. I smiled at his colleagues. I made polite, meaningless conversation with a woman whose face was pulled so tight she looked perpetually surprised. I held a glass of champagne, letting the bubbles die, but never taking a sip. Marcus was transformed. With my compliance secured, his anxiety had vanished, replaced by a slick, confident energy. He laughed, he schmoozed, he introduced me with a proud, proprietary air, as if I were a new acquisition. He was pre-celebrating his victory. He thought the hard part was over. Julian and Serafina were holding court. At 8:30, a soft chime silenced the room. Julian stood on a low, marble step, his arm around Sarah. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice smooth and commanding, filling the cavernous space without effort. He spoke about new beginnings, about finding Serafina, about the future. It was a beautiful speech, full of polished, empty sentiment. He raised his glass. "To my brilliant, beautiful fiancée, to Sarah, to Sarah." The room echoed. Marcus's hand tightened on my waist. His knuckles pressed into my hip. "Okay," he whispered, his voice urgent, his breath hot on my ear. "It is time. Now." He did not wait for my reply. He began to steer me through the crowd, his hand a rigid vice on my lower back. "Excuse us," he murmured, pushing past a cluster of men in tuxedos. My stomach did not flutter. My pulse did not race. I felt a slow, cold, hydraulic calm. The floor felt very solid under my 3-inch heels. He was leading me directly to the center of the room, where Julian and Serafina were receiving congratulations. They were not alone. They were standing with the man with the dried apple face I had seen earlier, and 2 other men who looked like old money, their suits quiet and perfectly tailored. Standing slightly apart from the men was an older woman, probably in her late 60s. She was incredibly elegant, in a Chanel suit the color of ivory, her silver hair coiled in a perfect chignon. She wore a triple strand of pearls. She watched Julian not with adoration, but with a keen, assessing sharpness. This was the inner circle. This was the audience. This was the stage Marcus had chosen for my final humiliation. We approached. Julian saw us first. His charming smile clicked into place. Serafina turned, her face a mask of queenly benevolence. "Marcus," she said, "we were just about to come find you." "Sarah," Marcus said. His voice was too loud, too hearty. He sounded like a bad actor in a high school play. "Congratulations. A wonderful speech. Julian. Wonderful." He gave my back a final, painful squeeze, a silent command. "Perform." "Sarah," Marcus said, stepping back slightly, gesturing to me as if presenting a show pony. "Ilara has something she'd like to say." It was a clumsy, brutal cue. The conversation stopped. The men turned, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to polite boredom. Julian's gaze sharpened, his smile tightening. He was expectant. This was the moment. The final test. Serafina's expression shifted. Her smile became one of pure, patronizing pity. She was preparing to be gracious. She was ready to forgive me. The room, in our immediate vicinity, had gone quiet. The low roar of the party seemed to recede, muffled by the weight of their attention. I could hear the faint, icy chime of the air conditioning. I could feel Marcus's stare boring into the side of my head. He was holding his breath. I looked directly at Serafina. I did not look at Marcus. I did not look at Julian. I focused all my energy on the woman who had demanded this. I let a small, unsteady breath escape me. I let my shoulders hunch, just a fraction. I looked down at my hands, as if gathering courage, and then I looked up, meeting her eyes. "Sarah," I said. My voice was soft, contrite. I want to apologize." It was perfect. The word hung in the air, a beautiful, shining admission of defeat. I saw Marcus's shoulders drop. I saw Julian's smile become genuine, a flicker of satisfaction, of a deal sealed. Serafina's face was a masterpiece of magnanimity. She put her hand on my arm, a gesture of comfort. "Oh, Ilara," she said, her voice like warm honey. "It is truly okay. Water under the bridge. I know you were just—" "No," I said, cutting her off. My voice was no longer soft. It was not loud, but it was clear. It was precise. It was the voice I used at work when I had found a critical error in a data model. It sliced through her syrupy tone and stopped her cold. Her hand froze on my arm. The pitying smile wavered. "I am sorry," I continued, "but you misunderstand. I do want to apologize. I have been thinking about it all year." I looked around the small circle, at Julian, at the men he was trying to impress, and then I looked back at Sarah. "I am apologizing," I said, my voice sweet, "about the incident at the holiday party last year." Sarah's face tightened. She did not like this. This was not the script. This was supposed to be a quiet, private word, but Marcus had made it public. And now, I was going to use his stage. "You see," I said, "I made a terrible mistake that night. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the elegant woman in the ivory suit. She was no longer watching Julian. She was watching me. Her head was tilted, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was listening. She was the only one in the group who looked truly intelligent, the only one who seemed to be analyzing, not just reacting. "Ilara," Marcus hissed. "That is enough. Just—" I held up a hand, a gentle, silencing gesture. "No, Marcus. She deserves to hear this. Everyone deserves to hear this." I turned my full attention back to Sarah. I smiled. A bright, warm, confessional smile. "My mistake," I said, "was that I should have been much, much louder." The air pressure in the room changed. It was not a gasp, but a collective, silent intake of breath. Serafina's face went blank. The practiced mask of benevolence shattered, leaving behind a cold, sharp confusion. Her hand dropped from my arm. "What? What did you say?" "I said I should have been louder," I repeated, my tone still perfectly reasonable, perfectly pleasant. "When I overheard you telling my boss I was unstable and too emotional to lead the Q4 project, well, I was quiet. I let Marcus pull me away. That was my error." Julian's smile was gone. It had not faded. It had vanished, like a light being switched off. His eyes were cold, hard chips of ice. "I should have made sure everyone heard you," I continued, my voice gaining a friendly, conversational energy. "I should have made sure all our colleagues, and Mr. Harrison, and the VPs, understood exactly what you were doing." I leaned in, as if sharing a delightful secret. "I should have made it crystal clear to everyone in that ballroom that you were lying, that you were trying to sabotage my career so you could poach my research for your own team." "You lying bitch!" she hissed. The word was a venomous puff of air. "Am I?" I asked. I tilted my head. "Am I lying, or am I just the only one here who has actually read your initial proposal and my former deskmate's project drafts from 6 months prior? The data is all there. Sarah, And data does not lie. I smiled, a real smile this time, wide and brilliant. So, yes, I am so sorry for being so quiet. It will not happen again. The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was a void, a dead, heavy pressure that seemed to suck all the air from the center of the room. The low roar of the party, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation. It all seemed to be happening in a different, distant universe. Here, in this circle of 5, there was no sound at all. Marcus was the first to break it. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, his face a ghastly shade of gray, mottled with sweat. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. "Ilara, you are drunk!" he yelled. His voice cracked, high and thin, drawing more attention. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in like talons, bruising the bone. "I am so sorry, everyone. She is not herself. She has been mixing medication. I am taking her home. Right now." He tugged. I did not move. My heels felt like they were bolted to the marble floor. I did not even look at him. I kept my gaze fixed on Serafina, who was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her perfect mask was gone, replaced by the pinched, ugly face of her true self. I smiled at her, a small, conspiratorial smile. But then again, keeping secrets is a very useful skill, is it not, Sarah? I said, my voice still light and conversational. You were always so good at it. Keeping your ambition secret. Keeping your methods secret. That is quite enough. Julian's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as a scalpel. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Serafina, a protective, possessive gesture. He was in control again, the host managing an unpleasant situation. He looked at me, his eyes devoid of all charm, now just flat, dead points of calculation. "Darling," he said to Sarah, his voice a soothing balm. "Do not let this woman upset you. Do not listen to her." He turned his gaze on me. It was not anger. It was dismissal. It was the look one gives a fly before swatting it. "It is clear what this is," he announced to the small, silent audience of investors and to his mother. "This is jealousy, a sad, desperate attempt to ruin the happiest night of her life. It is pathetic. I think you should leave." "Jealous?" I laughed. It was not a giggle. It was a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. The sound was shocking in the tense quiet. Marcus flinched as if I had struck him. "Jealous," I repeated. "Oh, Julian, no, I am not jealous. I am worlds past jealousy." I looked him right in the eyes, matching his coldness with my own analytic calm. "I am just curious." "Curious," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "I am a data analyst. You see, I look for patterns, and I have found a very strange one. I am curious why you, of all people, would care if I apologized to Sarah. I am curious why a man of your stature, a market maker like you, would even be aware of some petty office disagreement from a year ago." Julian's face did not change, but a small, tight muscle in his jaw twitched. I had him. He was not expecting me to know who he was, what his reputation was. He was not expecting me to be anything other than the emotional wife. I did not stop. I pressed the advantage. I had seen the data. I knew the query. "I am extremely curious," I said, my voice dropping slightly. "Why your new business deal with my husband?" Marcus made a sound, a low, strangled, "No," "is entirely, 100%, dependent on me standing here and publicly apologizing to your fiancé." "Stop it!" Marcus shouted. He lunged, not just grabbing me, but trying to physically shove me toward the door. "Stop it right now, Ilara. You are hysterical. You are ruining everything." I sidestepped his lunge. It was a small, neat movement, but his momentum was too great. He stumbled. catching his foot on the leg of a small table. His drink, the one he had been clutching, flew from his hand and shattered on the white marble floor, a dark, spreading stain of whiskey and a spray of broken glass. The room was now completely silent. Everyone was watching. Marcus, frozen, breathing hard, staring at the mess he had made. He looked clumsy, pathetic, and utterly desperate. And then, the woman in the ivory Chanel suit stepped forward. She had been silent until now, just a peripheral, elegant observer. Now, she moved into the center of the circle, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. She was not looking at me. She was not looking at Marcus, who was panting on her son's floor. She was looking at Julian. "Julian," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it had an authority that cut through Marcus's panicked breathing. It was the sound of old money, of a person who had never, in her life, needed to raise her voice to be obeyed. Julian froze. His mask of cool dismissal finally cracked, replaced by a flash of, was it fear? "Mother," he said, his voice tight. "This is not the time. It is just a drunken scene. Let me have security handle this." "Julian," she repeated, ignoring his protest. "What business deal?" Julian forced a short, impatient laugh. "It is nothing. Mother, just some exploratory nonsense with an old friend of Sarah's." "It is not even on the books. It is not worth discussing." "Is it not?" the woman said. Her eyes were sharp, like a hawk's. "Because this young woman," she gestured at me, not unkindly, but as one would indicate a key witness, "seems to believe it is a very specific deal. A deal contingent on her performance. A deal you have, apparently, been discussing with Marcus Thorne." She turned her gaze on Julian, and the temperature of the room dropped another 10 degrees. The investors, the men who had been watching in silence, suddenly looked very, very interested. The man with the dried apple face took a half step back, distancing himself from Julian. "You told your father," Julian's mother continued, her voice lethal, "that you were not doing business with Mr. Thorne. You told him, and I quote, that he was too small time and unvetted. You told him you had cut off all contact." This was the crack, the first, deep, structural fracture. Julian had not just lied to Marcus. He had not just lied to Sarah. He had lied to his own family. The family, I now realized, whose money was almost certainly the real source of his visionary fund. Serafina had been staring at me, her face a mask of white-hot rage. But now, her head snapped toward Julian. The hatred in her eyes was replaced by a new, sharp, and unfamiliar emotion. Doubt. She had been so secure in her victory, so certain of her place at the top. But she had just heard her fiancé get called out for lying to his mother, lying about Marcus, her perfect world, the one she had bought with my humiliation, suddenly had a hairline fracture. She looked at her fiancé, her voice small, the queenly confidence gone. Julian. Julian's face was a mask of controlled, white-hot fury. His mother had just exposed his lie, but it was my words, my presence, that had caused the crack. He looked at his mother, and for the first time, his charm was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian arrogance. "Mother, this is a party. We are not discussing business. This woman is clearly having a breakdown. I have asked her to leave." "Is she?" "Julian," his mother replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "She seems quite lucid to me. She seems, in fact, to have an excellent grasp of the data." Sarah's question, Julian, was still hanging in the air, a pathetic, unanswered plea. She was looking at him, her perfect, doll-like face a rictus of confusion and dawning horror. She had signed up to be a partner in a power couple, not the fiancé of a man being scolded by his mother. I smiled, a soft, sympathetic smile, and turned to her. He does not seem to want to talk about it. Does he? I said, my voice dripping with false empathy. It is a difficult conversation. It is not exactly the kind of thing one wants to discuss at one's own engagement party. I took a half-step closer to her, invading her space. She flinched, but did not back away. What about you, Sarah? I asked, my voice a confidential whisper that was still loud enough for everyone in our silent, horrified circle to hear. You are not shy. You are the ambitious one. You brokered this. Why do not you tell them? I do not know what you are talking about, she stammered. The lie was weak, transparent. Do you not? I asked. Let me refresh your memory. You used your influence over Julian. You convinced him that Marcus was the right man for this new venture, a man who could deliver. You promised him Marcus was reliable. I saw Marcus, still frozen by the puddle of his own spilled drink, shut his eyes. The shame was rolling off him in waves, and all Marcus had to do, I continued, my gaze locked on Sarah, was prove it, prove he could handle all his liabilities. All he had to do was prove he could control me. You are insane, Sarah whispered. Her voice was trembling. You are making this up. You are jealous. You have always been jealous of me. Always the same script. Sarah, I said with a sigh, I am not jealous. I just, as I said, find it useful to keep a record. Data integrity. You know, it is a professional habit. I reached into the small, elegant evening bag I had carried, the one that matched my emerald dress. Marcus's eyes snapped open, his gaze fixed on my hand. He knew what I had. He knew what he had deleted. I pulled out my phone. The simple black rectangle looked almost obscene in the opulent room. It was a cold, hard piece of reality. Emails are such mundane, permanent things, are they not? I said, holding the dark screen up, not for them to read, but as a symbol, as a weapon. I have the whole chain. Sarah, the one where you and Marcus discussed the terms of my performance, the one where you gave him his final instructions. I tilted my head, as if trying to recall the exact phrasing. How did it go again? Oh, yes. I believe your words were, Julian needs to see that you can control everything, including her, make her apologize, and the agreement will be signed. Does that sound familiar? Sarah, does that sound like the exploratory nonsense Julian was just talking about? Seraphina's face crumpled. It was not a thought, it was a physical collapse. Her hand, which was holding a full flute of champagne, went slack. The glass dropped, shattering on the marble with a sound that was shockingly loud, a second explosion of glass and liquid, right next to the mess Marcus had already made. No! Marcus screamed. It was not a word. It was a howl of pure, primal terror. He lunged, not at me, but at the phone. He was a wild animal, all pretense of the smooth, ambitious husband gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered creature. You are crazy, you are psychotic. Give me that phone, you are lying. He never reached me. I took one step back, and his own momentum, combined with the slick, champagne-covered floor, did the work for me. He slipped, his arms windmilling, and crashed down onto his hands and knees, right into the puddle of shattered glass. He cried out, a sharp sound of pain, and froze there, a pathetic, broken heap in a designer suit. I looked down at my husband, kneeling in a pile of broken glass and spilled liquor at my feet. The very picture of submission. I am not crazy. Marcus, I said, my voice as cold and clean as the marble. I am just a good data analyst. And you are sloppy. You really should remember to empty your computer's recycle bin. I put my phone back in my bag. I had no more use for Sarah, or for Marcus. They were just collateral damage. My real audience was still standing, untouched. I turned to Julian's mother. The investors had not moved. They were watching this unravel, their faces grim. This was no longer a domestic spat. This was business. Mrs. Croft, I said, my voice now crisp, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. I apologize for this scene. It was not my intention to ruin your son's party, but my husband, in his desperation to get into business with your son, was planning to offer him proprietary, stolen data from my company, Aperture Dynamics, my project. In fact, the investors stiffened. Stolen data. The man with the dried apple face repeated, "Yes," I said. As the lead analyst on that project, I felt a professional and ethical obligation to vet my husband's new partner. I turned my gaze on Julian, who was standing as still as a statue, his face a mask of white plaster. And when I started checking on Julian's terms and the company he listed in his emails, I found a few discrepancies, I said. A few anomalies in the data. Julian's mother took a sharp, audible breath. She knew what I was about to say. Anomalies, I continued, like that fraud lawsuit in Connecticut 5 years ago, the one you are all aware of, the one that was so mysteriously dismissed, the one where the lead plaintiff, a man who had lost his entire pension, suddenly dropped his case 2 days after his son was arrested on a decade-old drug trafficking charge, charges that were, in turn, dropped a week later. It was very efficient. The dried apple-faced man looked at Julian with pure disgust. You told us that was a nuisance suit. You told us it was thrown out on its merits. Blackmail is a form of leverage, I suppose, I said mildly. But that is not the interesting part. No, the really interesting part, the part that I think your investors and your family should know, is about the entity your son was using to fund this new, fraudulent venture with my husband. I let the words hang. A final, heavy silence. I spent 3 hours this afternoon, I said, looking for it. The LLC he named in his email to Marcus, Croft Horizon Partners. It is not registered in Delaware, or Nevada, or Wyoming. I looked at the investors, one by one. It is not registered anywhere, because it does not exist. It is a shell corporation, I stated. A ghost. A mechanism to funnel money, perhaps your money. Gentlemen into an off-book. Illegal operation. An operation with my husband set up to be the sole scapegoat when the theft of Aperture's data came to light. I turned, finally, to Julian's mother. She was pale, her hand at her pearls, but her eyes were flint. She was not a victim. She was an enabler, and she had just been exposed. Your son is not just a liar, Mrs. Croft, I said. He is a thief, and he was using a desperate, foolish man. I glanced down at Marcus, who was still kneeling, blood dripping from his palm, to commit a felony. All while using his ambitious fiancée, I looked at Sarah, who was weeping silently, her white dress stained with champagne, as the broker to seal the deal. The silence did not last. It cracked, shattered, and then detonated. The investors, the men who had been watching with a detached clinical interest, were no longer detached. The man with the dried apple face turned on Julian, his voice a low, furious hiss. A ghost corporation. You brought us here to co-invest in a felony. You used us as cover. Another man, one I had not noticed before, tall, silver-haired, with the rigid bearing of a man who had spent his life giving orders, pushed past Julian's mother. His face was a mask of thunder. He was not looking at Julian. He was looking at his daughter, Serafina, who was still weeping, her dress stained with champagne. This had to be her father. He then rounded on Julian. He did not shout. His voice was a low, terrifying growl that carried more menace than any scream. You are going to tie my daughter's name to this. Filth, Julian Croft, the wunderkind, the market maker, was trapped. He was completely surrounded. His mother stood on one side, a silent, furious statue of judgment. Seraphina's father was in his face, radiating pure, unadulterated menace. The investors were a closing circle, their expressions no longer bored or amused, but cold, reptilian, and assessing. They looked like a pack of wolves that had just cornered their prey and were deciding who got the first bite. The charm was gone. The charisma had evaporated like water on a hot stone. All that was left was the pale, sweating, wide-eyed panic of a con man whose mark had just revealed the sting. He tried to speak, to regain control. This is a misunderstanding. It is a fabrication. She is. But no one was listening to him. Seraphina's sobs had stopped. She was staring, not at her father, not at Julian, but with a dawning, sickened realization at the man still dripping blood onto the marble, at Marcus. Her voice was a cracked, broken whisper. Marcus. He flinched, his head snapping up. You knew, she said. It was not a question. You knew he was a fraud. You knew about the lies, the shell companies, all of it, and you still came to me. You still let me push him for this deal. You were going to let me marry him. Marcus scrambled to his feet, wincing as he put weight on his cut hand. He held his bleeding palm out to her, a pathetic, desperate gesture, a final, fumbling plea. No, Sarah, no, I swear. He babbled. The slick, confident salesman was gone, replaced by this desperate, terrified boy. I did not know about the shell company. I swear on my life I thought he was a big player. I thought the deal was real. Sarah, please, you have to believe me. He took a stumbling step toward her, his voice rising to a frantic whine. Sarah, I did this for us. I had not moved. I had not said a word since my revelation. I had simply stood, watching the variables I had set in motion collide. But now, I spoke. My voice was not loud, but it cut through his desperate plea, silencing the entire room again. For us, I repeated. The question was soft, almost academic. Marcus froze, his bleeding hand still outstretched. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a new, more profound terror. Elara, please, do not. I looked at him. I looked at the blood dripping from his hand, the pathetic desperation on his face. And then I looked at Seraphina, who was watching us, her mind visibly, painfully, piecing together the last ugly part of the puzzle. I am just curious. Marcus, I said, my voice as calm and clear as the Denver night air. Which us are you referring to? I let the question hang, a tiny, glittering, poisoned jewel. Is it the us, as in you and me, your wife? The us you have been lying to for months? The us whose life and career you were willing to trade for a 7-figure deal? The us you were going to destroy by stealing my work and setting me up as the liability? I let that sink in. I saw Seraphina's eyes widen. Or, I continued, my voice still light, are you talking about the other us? The us that you and Sarah had planned? I turned my gaze fully on Seraphina. Her face was ashen. The us you were going to build after Julian's money came through the use that required you to abandon me, take the fraudulent cash, and ride off into the sunset with your perfect ex-girlfriend. That was it. The kill shot. The final fatal data point. Seraphina's head snapped back as if I had physically struck her. She looked at Marcus, at his bleeding hand, at his face, which was now a mask of pure, guilty, indefensible horror. He could not deny it. He could not speak. She finally understood. He had not done this for her. He had done this to her. He was not her partner. He was not her lovelorn, ambitious ex. He was just another user, just like Julian. He was planning to use her influence to get Julian's money, and then, presumably, discard them both. She was not his prize. She was his leverage. She had been played. By everyone. Most of all, by the man she had always believed was her inferior. The room imploded. "Security!" Serafina's father roared. He pointed a thick, trembling finger at Julian. "Get this filth, out of my sight. Now." Two large men in black suits who had been standing, immobile, by the door, materialized. They were on Julian in a second. They grabbed him by the arms. His arrogance returned for one brief, sputtering moment. "Get your hands off me. Do you have any idea who I am?" "We know what you are," Julian's mother said. Her voice was pure ice. It was the first thing she had said. It was his sentence. The men began to drag him, struggling and cursing, toward the entrance. The investors followed, a silent, grim-faced pack, their phones already out. Serafina. She just stood there. She was not crying anymore. She was vibrating. She looked at Julian being dragged away. She looked at her father, his face purple with rage. She looked at Marcus, who was just staring at me, his mouth open, destroyed, a man who had lost everything, twice, in the span of 5 minutes. And then she did something I had never, ever seen her do. She lost control. With a sound that was half scream, half sob, a noise of pure animal rage, she reached up to her neck and grabbed the enormous, glittering diamond necklace Julian had given her. She tore it from her throat. The clasp snapped, sending a spray of diamonds, tiny and perfect, scattering across the marble floor like spilled salt. "Get out!" she screamed. She was not screaming at Julian. She was screaming at everyone. At her father. At the remaining guests. At Marcus. At me. "Get out, all of you. Get out of my life." She sank to the floor, her beautiful, triumphant white dress puddling in the spilled whiskey and broken glass, a ruined queen on a ruined throne. The chaos was total. Guests were flooding toward the exit, their faces a delicious mix of horror and excitement. They had a story to tell for months. Sarah's father was barking orders. Julian's mother was on her phone, her back to the room, her voice low and lethal, presumably liquidating her son's life. And then there was Marcus. He stood alone in the center of the wreckage. Serafina was on the floor, weeping. Julian was gone. The investors were gone. His future was gone. He just stood there, his hand bleeding, his suit ruined, his face completely, utterly empty. He was a shell corporation, a ghost. He finally turned his gaze to me. I was the only thing left. His eyes were not angry. They were not sad. They were just empty. I had not said a word since my final question. I had no more data to present. The analysis was complete. I just stood there, in my emerald dress, in my armor. I looked at the man I had once loved, the man who had tried to trade me for a better life. I looked at the ruin he had built, and the ruin he had become, and I smiled. It was not the soft, submissive smile I had practiced. It was not a smile of pity or of anger. It was a smile of pure, cold, and radiant liberation. It was a bright, terrible, and final smile. It was the smile of an analyst who has just run the final query and found the absolute, cleansing truth. That was the smile that ended Serafina's engagement. That was the smile that ended my marriage. I did not say goodbye. I did not offer him a hand. I did not say another word. I just turned, my back straight, the silk of my dress cool against my skin. I walked away from my husband, who was still bleeding on the floor. I walked past Serafina, who was sobbing in the ruins of her party. I walked out of that cold glass box into the clean, cool Denver night. And I was, for the first time in a very long time, free. Thank you for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop your location in the comments to connect and share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.